Yeah, I'm trying to be very regular on YouTube now. As you can see, let's see how long this lasts. I hope it goes on for good, but we can't be sure. So anyway, coming to the topic of ego, we all know how ego works. We are all egoistic. Without our ego, without a bias, we'll be nothing. Uh, in some ways, it's paradoxical how these so-called negative traits end up defining who we are. Like if you say somebody has self-respect, how do you separate that from that person's ego, right? So it's a very weird mix that we all humans like exhibit on a daily basis, but we exhibit it more like vigorously in the creative field, where we have to work with someone who is also creative. Like if you're a copywriter and you're working with a designer, that person is also creative, but he's from a different field and you're from the different field, and but you're together, combining to create something together, right? And that is why it is a creative process, and that is why uh, the collective output is much more important than individual ego. Got it? So if you are feeling small when your input is rejected, then something is fishy or something is wrong. You know why? Because you're failing to separate yourself from who you are. Got it? If you think that your work is getting rejected, it doesn't mean that you are getting rejected. If your line is getting rejected, if your idea is getting rejected, it means that that idea maybe the team feels or the team lead feels is not fitting in well. That doesn't mean that you are getting rejected. Now, this is something which we have to learn, like perhaps as soon as possible. Otherwise, we'll unnecessarily beat ourselves up, thinking that what we create is who we are, and that's actually a fucked up place to be, even in the creative world. It's terrible. So how do you let this whole game not affect you adversely? First of all, you have to understand that whatever you suggest and whatever you think is your creative juice, that will keep on flowing as long as you want it to flow. You shouldn't think that just because an idea gets you know outruled doesn't mean that you will be out of ideas tomorrow. No, your job is to just constantly kind of push that button where you constantly come up with new ideas, right? And that is how most of the creative, at least the ones who are brilliant, they function. They don't get too attached to their work. They move on, and uh, if you ask them talk about their portfolio, they will be lost. They'll be lost because they didn't think too much about what they did in the past. They constantly are thinking about what they're going to do next. So that is how they suppress their ego, because ego is, at the end of the day, in a collaborative process, it becomes this extra member in a meeting room, and it's never good. It creates these unnecessary frictions, uh, because people think that ego matters when it doesn't. Actually, what really matters is the output. If anything, the the positivity in that room should be so high that you are supporting each other's ideas rather than pulling each other down. To give you an example, so there's a friend who is working on an ad campaign, and the ad campaign is like been the production for almost 3-4 months or something, and then they're stuck at one point where they are not able to get that punchline, which is very necessary. And whatever the writer is coming up with, uh, it's not kicking, because uh, a, a kick-ass line is something which you hear it and you know that this is it. And even most of the time we don't get it. We don't realize that okay, this is better than that, or and that's why it's a very it's a juggling process, right? So what happened is the actor who was in this ad film, he suggested a line, and the producer and the director, they loved it. Loved it means loved it. But the writer, that person was offended. Why? Because that person felt that, oh, if an actor can do my job, what is my purpose? Like, what am I doing here? Now, that's such a terrible way to look at things, because the whole point of creativity is to appreciate something which is brilliant, something which is brilliant. It's outrageously splendid. That is what you're supposed to do, right? But in that person's ego, uh, there was unnecessary pushbacks and unnecessary rona dona about how this line is not good enough. Although anybody with even 25 grams of brain could have figured out that that line is a puncher, but no. Now, this is one example of how ego doesn't help you rise above yourself. If anything, it tells us that some of the finest ideas come from those who are not even on the sidelines of that particular sphere. Like, if we think that we don't understand design, maybe someone who don't even, you know, uh, it's very difficult to explain, right? Uh, how you and I, who are very, like, you can see my blog, you can see my YouTube, I'm very design challenged. But I'm pretty sure, like, even I and you or whoever is design challenged, they will come up with something which is brilliant from time to time, obviously. Now the question is, like, who's going to appreciate it? Now that is where the ego check comes into place. Now this is one example. Now there's another example from the movie Departed, The Departed, which you might have watched, where Jack Nicholson, uh, he and Ray Winston, who are both, like, you know, proper mafia gangsters, and they are killing someone, and it's supposed to be a, very morbid scene. It's supposed to be that, but Jack Nicholson, being writers, like actor or whatever, like, he suggested something to Martin Scorsese, the director, and that entire scene where he's killing someone, it turns into comedy. Although death can't be associated with comedy, right? But because Martin Scorsese listened to Jack Nicholson, that's how that particular scene where he says, he cracks a joke about how funny the man who was shot dead fell. Now, this happened because Martin Scorsese was obviously open to listening to someone like Jack Nicholson, who has worked for decades. Obviously, there's no comparison there. But the point is, even a writer can be someone who is not even a writer, who is an actor. So, what these stories tell us is that you have to keep your ego aside, because ideas can be coming in from the most bizarre of places. You are talking to your nephew or niece, and she or he will say something which will just spark an idea, right? So you have to be open to embracing ideas. So you have to be, humble enough to understand and accept that anything is possible in the world of creativity, as long as we suppress or at least keep our ego in check.